everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. For come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Baltazar.
And welcome to another exciting preview for a non-conference game. This time, K-State going down to New Orleans to face off against the Tulane Green Wave. And we all remember what happened last time K-State played Tulane. And it was one of the most frustrating experiences we've had probably in this entire show's run. One of, not the is still probably the Oklahoma State 21 rant. But yeah, before we get into the scouting report and what we have to say about the players, we do want to thank the sponsors of today's episode. That is Greg, Arthur, and Grandma.
Thank you, Grandma.
And if you want to support the show and have your name read out at the beginning of every episode, please be sure to check out the supporters link found in our podcast and Twitter bios. But let's just dive straight in to the Tulane Green Wave. And this is going to be a different looking Tulane team than what we faced up against in 2022. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But probably the most pressing of the reasons is a new head coach. Willie Fritz is now at Houston, but the new head coach of Tulane is now John Summerall, who you may remember as the head coach of Troy when we played Troy last year. So in a lot of ways, the scouting report is based a little bit off of what was seen against Southeastern Louisiana in the first week of the season, but it is mostly based off of Troy because, they produced a lot of the same looks. But another reason why this team is different from 2022 is they lost a lot of talent between now and then. They lost Tyjae Spears, they lost Michael Pratt, Dorian Williams. I believe Jonathan Alexander is gone as well.
I think so.
He would almost have to be, right?
I mean, you would think, right? Like there's no shot that he's still here.
Yeah. The point being they've lost a lot of talent, and this is a basically completely new team. So before we get into the nitty gritty scouting report, Connor, what are your sort of vibes going into this game down in New Orleans?
I'm trying to figure out how I feel because on one hand, I feel like this should be about what the spread says it is. Like if we went by double digits on the road in any contest, I'm generally going to be pretty pleased with that. And I do feel like we outmatched this team. However, I also do have a functioning long-term memory. And I do remember the last time we played Tulane, we definitely, we for sure didn't know how good they were going to be, I still think that we were a better team than they were when it was all said and done. We still managed to lose that game. So I do worry a little bit. So maybe some of it's not necessarily rational anxiety, but I guess what is. I'm cautiously optimistic because I was pretty optimistic last time we faced Tulane. I'm going to put some more caution on it to preserve my well-being, but I still think that this is a game that K-State should be able to control.
Yeah. And I think I'm sort of finding myself in that camp, but we'll dig more into it as we sort of go through everything. So we're going to start off with just their offensive scheming. And it's pretty much what you saw a lot of from Troy last year. And it's what people commonly mislabel as a pro-style offense, which means a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, 1 running back. Why is it mislabeling it as a pro-style offense? Because unless you're like the Steelers or the Falcons or the Titans, very few teams are still basing 12 personnel. But that's a rant for a different time. But the main difference between the Troy offense from last year, which was basically the same scheme, and this Tulane offense, at least in the Southeast Louisiana game, they used a lot more motion. They especially liked using motion to get receivers. Basically, it's an escort motion where they are going to use the receiver as an extra blocker most of the time on the line of scrimmage, sort of as a substitute for a split blocker that you'd usually use from like a wing tight end. But that's not to say that they're just a team that runs the ball 100 times a game and everything like that. They are capable of spreading out the field, but they mostly do it on longer passing situations where it's you're not going to run. The play action fake isn't fooling anyone in that situation. But very similar to Troy last year again, it's a different sort of running game than what Tulane is used to running. This is a lot of zone running concepts, like outside, inside zone, a lot less gap than we saw from Tulane and a lot less counter than we saw from Tulane in 2022 and especially last year. And in the passing game, you have a lot of the slide concept that everyone just calls it the Shanahan play because it's the Shanahan play. But and if you don't know what I'm referring to, you can just Google the Shanahan play, and I'm almost certain that you will see it. But it's a lot of those more efficient passing concepts where they are going to keep a few more guys in the block to go deep. So like max protect play action is going to be the bulk of their explosive plays. And so in a lot of ways, it functions very similar to sort of like the Baylor offenses when Baylor, under Jeff Grimes, it functioned like a lot of those Baylor offenses to a little bit more success in the Sun Belt, where it is this running game based offense that's going to try and hit you over the top with play action. So it is a more traditional style of offense, which in a strange way may play to K-State's disadvantage in a 3-3. Not because the 3-3 is bad against the running game, that's a misnomer, but because they aren't focused on the slant windows. And that's exactly what the 3-3 exists to stop.
Yeah, I don't really know what to answer that, other than I am a little bit worried about some of their athletes on the outside. Because Mario Williams was, I think, a 5-star recruit at one point. And
yeah, he was a 5-star recruit, and he was
at OU, right?
Yeah.
So
OU and then USC.
Yeah, so he followed Lincoln Riley around, and I remember him like starting out hot. Yeah, he started out pretty well, and then kind of just plateaued for his career. But I don't know. I do worry a bit about that. Mario Williams had a nice week in week 124 receiving yards. But, they're still going to be breaking in a freshman quarterback and Darian Mensah, and that's never easy, no matter how good or bad or in between that quarterback is. Even if they have a year under their belt with like a red shirt or if they played a little, it's, still nothing really beats game reps. And it's going to be a pretty stark difference going from like Southeast Louisiana to a Power 4.
Yeah. And now you get to talk a little bit about their defensive scheming.
Yeah. They run a lot of off-zone stuff on defense. They really like to rotate the strong safety down to a hook zone and cover 3 to fill the slant and curl windows. They blends pretty well with their quarter half on unbalanced formation looks. Then on the defensive line, they play mostly a modified over front on the defensive line, where their backside edge is lined up wide. They blend that with some hybrid looks, with some walked up linebackers, but they mostly base in 4-2 over. So so a little bit of a, I can't really quite call it unusual, but we're at the very least more used to seeing a straight up 3-3-5, and they're running the 4-2 hybrid with a standing edge rusher. I think Casey kind of did that in 2020 at times with Wyatt Hubert as the standing edge rusher, but so it's not unheard of. And then they're rotating some safeties down to still try and cover those slant windows that the 3-3-5 is so good protecting against. But again, first year coach, a lot of times defense is a pretty difficult thing to figure out under first year coach. So I'm interested to see how it holds against a more powerful opponent, I suppose, in Southeast Louisiana.
Yeah, I think powerful is a good word to use, but it's also worth noting that although they do base 4-2 ogre, which for those unfamiliar, it's a 3-tech defensive tackle, so outside shoulder, the guard, to the strong side of the formation, and then typically a nose tackle or a shade lined up to the weak side. Under is the opposite, as you might guess. But they do have another look where it's very similar to the tight front that TCU and Baylor ran for a while, but with 2 linebackers walked up, and that's more their true hybrid, where it's 2 linebackers instead of just like a walked up edge. But yeah, their defense is a very, very different style from, and I know that you could basically go back and listen to a combination of the 2022 Tulane review and the Troy preview from last year, and you'd get a pretty decent idea of what this team is. This episode is shorter than listening to both of those. So, but Troy, or rather Tulane in 2022, was a very sort of aggressive defense. They blitzed a lot. They wanted to make you uncomfortable. They wanted to play physical. This isn't that same style of defense. They're more of a read and react defense than a true attacking defense. Although they do blitz on occasion. It's just the Tulane defense of 22 with Dorian Robinson was an attacking defense. It was the most offensive defense that we saw pretty much that entire year. But we'll start off talking about the notable players on offense and defense. And I feel like I've said my fair share, and we'll talk a little bit more about these players. And obviously, I'll jump on as needed. But I'll let you talk about their starting quarterback and maybe even who the starting quarterback beat out, because that was a big surprise from the Tulane camp.
Yeah. So the starting quarterback ends up being Darian Mensah, who's I think a true freshman. Is he a true freshman or redshirt freshman?
I think he's redshirt.
Okay, that makes sense. But he still he beat out Ty Thompson, the transfer from Oregon, for the starting job, as well as a returning quarterback, Kai Horton, who had snaps in the 3 previous seasons. So he was able to beat multiple players with high-level football experience and do that as just a freshman. So that's a really difficult feat, and definitely a bit of a surprise, because I think Ty Thompson was the presumed starter, really, is what he was. But instead, it's going to be Darian Mensah. So other than his ability to defeat other quarterbacks in preseason quarterback battles, he's really decisive. He doesn't hitch on his throws really much at all. And he was more than willing to take anything the moment that he thought it was open. His arm strength isn't the greatest, though, and his accuracy isn't surgical. It's more general. He's not as good as Michael Pratt, who's made his way to the NFL this year, but he's still really confident. Of course, his decisiveness is going to help him, maybe hurt him. At times, that could be something to exploit, as well as it being a benefit. But he's good at hitting his reads without much panic. But then again, that was the first start of his career against a not very good Southeast Louisiana team. So the sample size is very, very small for Darian Mensah, but it's going to be interesting to see how he fares against this K-State defense this coming week.
Yeah, and I think a big part of Darian Mensa's decisiveness is the offensive system that he's running with, where he is going to get the time because of the extra blockers. So he on a play will really only have, two decisions to make at once. Primary deep read, probably underneath intermediate, and then the check down. That's really all he's going to have to do. And if you look at a coverage structure, that's not overly difficult, especially if you're getting more time from the play action, because you're banking on someone biting down. You're banking on players biting down on the run action. So I think that really, like every quarterback, you hear this a lot in NFL circles, but it equally applies to college. Is the best there are two best friends of an inexperienced / young quarterback: a good tight end and the play action game. Good tight end is just because you want the big guy that can just win a matchup. And the play action game is because most of the time you're cutting the field in half or cutting the reads they have to make in half while giving them a little bit more time. So play action in a weird way is simplifying the game plan. And I think that that's something that Mensa can certainly do. I mean, 65% of his dropbacks against Southeast Louisiana were off of play action. So yeah, he's going to like that. That's going to be the main part of the running game, and that's going to be most of Mensa's game. And I think that K-State hasn't necessarily fared horribly against pure play action teams before. I mean, they played well against Baylor. I feel like every time that we do one of these previews, we like try to comp to a Big 12 team, and it's not like a perfect comparison, but it's more to just get the point. The offense of Tulane, I about to say TCU, is closer to Baylor than just about everyone else, just schematically. I feel like we have a system going of you introduce the player and I give random schematic to. I'm basically on color commentary today.
All right, then I'll go and keep going then. Mekhi Hughes, he's their star running back. Last year, he was really fantastic. Ran for 1,300 yards, only 7 touchdowns, which for the amount of yards he got is kind of weird. They averaged 5.3 yards per carry, just a little under 250 carries at 243 last season. He got 14 carries in the first game of the season, just 59 yards, though, and a touchdown. And he's only a sophomore. He was the American Athletic Conference Rookie of the Year last year. Had several 100-yard games. So, I mean, as far as replacing Tyjae Spears goes, I mean, you can't do much better. He had a streak in the middle of AAC play of 7 straight 100-yard games that was broken up by a 72-yarder. Then he followed that up with 166 against UTSA. So he is liable to explode at about any point. And we should expect a pretty big day from him. He, however, was in week 1 a victim of the offensive line adjusting to new blocking schemes. He had really great speed and vision last year and showed a ton of promise, particularly for being 210 pounds and having the speed that he does. So he may not have the 4.4 speed that will draw eyes and have draft stocks rise at the combine. He's still got plenty of speed that can punish people if we aren't going to be willing to respect him or get proper pursuit angles. It really entirely comes down to is the offensive line going to adjust a little bit more to this new scheme in game action here in week 2. Because it's not easy to completely switch up running schemes with really any amount of warning, even a whole off season. But his success is going to hinge entirely on that, because 14 carries, 59 yards, and a touchdown is not a bad stat line, but it's pretty pedestrian, particularly for a guy that was a conference rookie of the year last year. So his success this week is going to come down to this offensive line for Tulane. I can put things together.
Yeah, and sort of related to the new scheme with the offensive line is last year don't get me wrong, he was still pretty solid outside of whenever you think of outside runs, typically you define them as outside or at the tackles, and inside runs is everything that's not that. But the last season, he did run a lot off off tackle. In fact, that was his most efficient sort of running, but he was also really, really efficient running between the tackles last season. And he took a lot of his carries just in that area. Granted, in a limited sample size, only 14 carries this year. Carries are going outside. He's not running up the middle. He has exactly 4 carries of his 14 up the middle. And I just don't think that either the line is there, and I don't think he has the skill set of a pure outside zone runner. I think he is more of a gap running back, which is meaning to say he's more of a one cut and go back than a speed back like a Devin Achane, who gets away with not having great vision because he is in an outside zone scheme and is just faster than everyone else. Which there as much as I love backs with great vision, there is something to say about guys who are just faster than everyone else. I mean, Raheem Mostert notoriously had horrible vision. That's why he didn't play until he was like 30, but he was fast. So Mekhi Hughes is a really interesting player in that I sort of think he's a scheme mismatch, but I don't think that makes him bad. I still think he's going to be like a plus running back and almost certainly the best piece of this Tulane offense. So a world where K-State loses is a world where Mekhi Hughes almost certainly gets more than 100 yards rushing, because the offense really does sort of run through him, no pun intended on running.
Yeah, particularly with a freshman quarterback, I think you're not going to be able to completely rely, I don't think, on Darian Mensah to be 100% the entire game. There's going to be drives where Tulane wants to win. They're going to have to get great blocking and great running from Mekhi Hughes. So that's going to be a huge key to victory for them.
Yeah. Now you can slide into Mario Williams. Pause.
Yeah, I'm going to hit the pause on that. But Mario Williams, he started his career at Oklahoma, transferred to USC. So K-State has seen him before, back when he was at Oklahoma. He is the most notable remaining player for this Tulane team. He led Tulane by a lot receiving yards in week 1. In fact, he had almost 100 more yards than the next closest, with his 4 catches for 124, 31 yards per catch. Small sample size and a long of 68, but still that is the kind of weapon that he is and kind of has been throughout his career. He's always kind of been a home run hitter first and foremost, particularly given he's 5'9", 178. So he is just more keen for that. He's projected to be a 4th to 5th round pick. He's, I think, a former 5-star. And he's yet another supremely physically gifted athlete who just isn't quite able to put everything together. Because, his speed and shiftiness has elite level. It's going to be among the best that K-State sees all year. But his more technical receiving talent, it's good. It's just not at that same elite level. And that's kind of what holds him back. But as a true freshman at Oklahoma, he was playing. He had 33 catches for 347 yards, 4 touchdowns, and kind of a big season the following year at USC, had almost 600 yards and 5 touchdowns. Then just kind of fell back. Kind of this same issue is he just doesn't have quite enough in terms of those technical skills to get back to the first round hype that he once had. Now, it's not to say the possibilities aren't there, because he definitely has the baseline talent to become a guy that at least deserves to be in those first round conversations. And I think we still, regardless, need to treat him as if he's a first round talent. Not to say that guys shouldn't be taken seriously if they aren't, but just that we need to give him the respect that he deserves, because he is an extremely athletic player that can burn us at pretty much any given moment. And in a play action offense, we could potentially be prone to that because we are a pretty aggressive downhill defense, and we really like to use our safeties and run defense. They're very good at that, but it does sometimes expose us to an explosive play on the back end. So with Mario Williams, we need to be ready for that.
Yeah, and a big part of why Mario Williams sort of saw that dip in his stock was for there are a few reasons. Firstly, the last year at USC, he was just straight up not a wide receiver. He was a slot receiver. 88% of his snaps were from the slot. And it's extremely difficult for you to be a first round, like treated as a legit dude receiver when you're working exclusively out of the slot. The like lone exception to that was Justin Jefferson coming out of LSU, where like 90% of his snaps were from the slot. However, he also had Terrence Marshall Jr. and Jamar Chase on that team. So there is a caveat there. But the other big thing was he doesn't have the best pair of hands. His hands are really inconsistent. His lowest drop rate that he had was, funnily enough, his true freshman season, where he didn't drop a single pass. Ever since then, he's had a drop rate above 9%, which is bad. That's really not good. And the highest it ever got was his sophomore season at USC, where he had a 13% drop chance. So 1 in 10 passes that he was getting were going to be dropped when he was a slot guy. You can't have that. But that being said, he is playing more that outside role this year. He is like their best receiver, and it is in part because he can play multiple positions in terms of like where he lines up. And I do think that he's probably a little underrated as like a 4th to 5th round pick, mostly just because we've seen a lot of just high potential guys that aren't great receivers get drafted higher just on their athleticism alone. And I think that Mario Williams has the potential to be like a 2nd, 3rd round guy if he hits his ceiling, most likely like a 3rd to 4th round guy. But he's definitely, outside of Mekhi Hughes, he's definitely the scariest part of this offense. And I'm not going to say that the rest of the receiving core doesn't worry me at all, because, Sunbelt receivers are good for like 2 plays a game where they suddenly turn into prime Calvin Johnson. Our goal is to just avoid those plays from the rest of the guys.
Yeah. Luckily, all 4 of their leading receivers, which this is like shades of Snyder 2.0, all of their leading receivers are like 5'10" or shorter. So that might be the saving grace to prevent us from getting just horribly mossed. I knock on wood heavily, but there's still some really good players available for them beyond Mario Williams. Bryce Bohannon's good. Keith Brown, he was pretty productive last year and started out at Texas A&M. And then they have a really good true freshman, Zycarl Lewis Jr., who made a couple of catches in the first game. He was a pretty highly touted recruit. Yeah, he was a high 3-star in the top 700 prospects nationally. Like, that's kind of in the realm, like rating wise, of where a lot of guys start to go Power 5, and he ended up going to Tulane, which is again one of the better G5 programs in the country. But that's a guy that could probably play at the Big 12 level pretty easily, at least based on his high school evals. So there's plenty of talent in this receiver room beyond Mario Williams, but Mario Williams definitely the biggest threat.
Yeah. And I also think it's worth noting that this is another difference from that 2022 Tulane team where both of their main receivers were just big. Like they were large and fast. This one is more shifty and fast, which again speaks more to they want to be more of a deep threat, less contested catches, more bomb you over the top type of offense after running the ball like 7 times. But now you get the very short notes about the offensive line.
Yeah. So this offensive line for Tulane, we talked about them a little bit already, but they don't really have a lot of star power right now, and it's an adjustment to a new scheme, is what's going on really with this Tulane offensive line. They're not super familiar with it, and it's a tough adjustment because learning your job as an offensive lineman, that already generally is going to take most guys at minimum a full season, unless you're just a unicorn. But a lot of guys, though, it may end up taking longer. And then you go from knowing that whole system to all of a sudden you have to learn something pretty much entirely different in just one off season. So that's an adjustment period for pretty much anybody, no matter how talented you are. So that's the predicament their offensive line's in right now.
Yeah, and I don't really have anything smart to add to that. It's just I don't think their offensive line is like putrid. I don't think it's bad. I just think that they don't have that one guy that you can say is their anchor, and they're getting used to a new system. There is some overlap, which the overlap isn't big. But even if there's some, you still have to sort of relearn terminology and things like that. But overall, what are sort of, I guess, what are your general thoughts of the K-State defense against this Tulane offense?
I think pound for pound, our defense should be superior to their offense. Now, with that being said, I think that there are ways that Tulane can exploit us. Again, I'm still a little bit worried about them going max protect and sending like Mario Williams and I don't name somebody else deep, and potentially after some if they get some success running the ball without us and forces us to maybe commit our safeties a little bit more, I could see them kind of getting an explosive play, maybe even a big touchdown off of that. So that's where I'm most concerned because our defense is pretty susceptible to that. We've seen our safeties get burnt over the top quite a few times. We saw it a few times in the first game, 3 times, I think, although it only actually burned us once. Our safeties did get burned a few times in that first game. So that's where I'm going to probably be the most concerned going into this week. I think our defensive line and linebackers stand a pretty good matchup against this offensive line and front group for Tulane. So I'm hoping that this rotation on the front 7 for K-State, it seemed really effective. I'm hoping it continues to be because we saw a lot of guys play in week 1. I think that could maybe be an advantage, particularly with the heat and humidity down south.
Yeah, because as we all know, the famously hospitable environment known as New Orleans, Louisiana.
Yeah.
And I'll get more into this whenever we pick our offensive and defensive MVPs and things to watch. But the big weakness with a zone running game is if the other side can sort of out-athlete you. And I think that is something that K-State can do. I think that they will be more successful than Troy was last year, at least from a top-to-bottom perspective. Mekhi Hughes is not Kamani Vidal because Kamani Vidal was quietly like a top 5 running back in the country for Troy. But I think that everything outside of running back is probably an upgrade from what was set up at Troy from a purely like talent perspective. I still think K-State is a pretty good matchup for this zone running game, especially because a big part of what gave us any hiccups with Troy whatsoever was sort of, letting them take underneath and then just run after the catch. It was the West Virginia Jarrett Daggy problem, where it was very little to do with the actual quarterback and a lot to do with the receivers just slipping one tackle and making life hell. So, yeah, there is one person in particular that I will be picking as my defensive MVP because of the scheme. But before we obviously get into that, we still have another side of the ball to cover. There are notable players. There's really only the two big notable players that are getting any draft hype, which, of course, Connor, you can start us off there.
Yeah, so the first one is a guy that I already am a fan of, specifically because of the combination of his position and his number. And that's Patrick Jenkins, the defensive tackle who wears number 0. I have a soft spot in my heart for single-digit defensive linemen, and a number 0 on top of that. That be still my beating heart for Patrick Jenkins. I'm very happy with that. He originally was a TCU guy, actually. Spent 2 years there back in 2020 and 21. And then he was one of the few players that was playing a lot back when K-State played Tulane in 2022. He had 33 tackles and 3 sacks that year. Last year had 5.5 sacks. On that K-State game, I think he had 3 tackles in that one. Yeah, that's right. He had 3 tackles. So one of the few guys that actually did play in that game. And he's really, really good. They move him all around the defensive front. He plays some run-stopping defensive end. He also was a pretty effective pass-rushing defensive tackle. He had 5.5 sacks last year. So that's inherent. His strongest ability, though, is he does not lose contain. He is an instant win kind of guy. We've had players that we've talked about on this podcast before where it's pretty much they either win or lose the rep like immediately. I think Siaki Ika was one of those guys.
Yep, he sure was.
Patrick Jenkins is not a Siaki Ika type of guy. He just reminds you that he is there. He gets solid pressure on a consistent basis. He has a long arm stab that he likes to go to, and goes into a swim move to the inside from that. And he specifically is going after the inside of the elbow to break grip. And he has very quick hands, although he can, in pass rush sets, play a little high. That's not an unusual problem for an inside guy trying to play more pass rush. It's harder to do all that while carrying additional weight. So, but he's still a force to be reckoned with for this K-State offense. So, and I'd say, Sam Hecht or Handley Panzer, they're going to have to be up for the challenge, but he kind of plays all over. So just about everybody's probably going to get a taste of Patrick Jenkins at some point.
Yeah, I am. Patrick Jenkins is another really, really solid piece to this defense. Last year, you mentioned he had 5.5 sacks, but he also had a total of 42 pressures, which is a lot for a guy who's mostly rushing from the interior. And it really is that ability to just keep working towards the quarterback. And that's why his biggest stat is not like hits or immediate pressure, but hurries. He's just going to remind you that he's there. And it gets really annoying dealing with interior pressure. You could ask just about every quarterback who's ever played, and they will tell you their least favorite type of pressure is not like, blindside edge or, anywhere from the edge. It's interior, because at least when you're getting rushed from the edge, you can step up. But if you're getting rushed from the interior, you just have like two men that are getting pushed into your lap. And that's not what you really want when you're trying to pass a football, because it makes it really, really hard to step into your throw and just get the ball off. And that's exactly what Patrick Jenkins does best. So to my mind, if you're wondering where he's getting draft hype, it is admittedly like a day 3 pick kind of guy, just sort of flyer on maybe a pass rush specialist from the interior. But there is a lot of value to that. And I think Patrick Jenkins is a really, really good player. I think he's probably a little bit underrated in like the national conversation, because I think if you look at like players from the American and where they're ranked, I think in the preseason, like there was a list of top 10 American Conference draft prospects, and Ty Thompson was ahead of him. So
yeah, Ty Thompson is currently QB2 at Tulane, so I think it's fair to say that his draft prospects are going down.
But there is one more notable name that to this defense that I feel probably worth a big bow, I suppose.
Yeah, Tyler Grubbs, the super senior linebacker, 5th-year linebacker. He's a hometown guy out of New Orleans. Started at Louisiana Tech. Started for 3 years there. All the way back in 2020, he was a starter as a true freshman. Had 84 tackles that year as a true freshman, which was incredible. 97 the following season, only 49 in 2022. Although he did, I think, suffer a season-ending injury at some point because he didn't play any games after October 8th. But then he transfers to Tulane, had 75 tackles last year, including 3 sacks. And then had a modest first game with 3 total tackles. But this is a really, really solid guy. He's an instinctual playmaker, is the way that we've chosen to describe him. He doesn't have much in the way of creativity when he's forced to meet a lineman, but he's still pretty good at figuring out a way to make things happen. Strongest asset, though, is he has great instincts and he knows how to get to the right place at the right time. He's great at flowing with the play, and his pass coverage reaction time is really, really quick as well. He has 8 pass deflections over his career, which really any level of pass coverage competency as a linebacker is a plus, and he's pretty good in that department. But, I mean, he's a very, very, very experienced linebacker for Tulane.
Yeah, and I think if, obviously we do, like I said earlier, we do comps just not because they are this player, but because it helps get a picture of them. In a lot of ways, he's like Austin Moore, but worse at tackling, because he does miss about anywhere 15 to 20% of his tackles, which is bad, but he's always in the right general area to make a play, because, he is just sort of that right place, right time linebacker. And a big part of his coverage ability is once he sees the ball is even close to being thrown, he is off like a bullet immediately to where the ball is going. So, he may give up the catch, but you're not going to get too much afterwards, or at least you're not going to get too much afterwards fast if he is in the area. So his sort of best asset is cutting down on the easy running back check down completions, because you're going to get like 2 or 3 yards out of it, but he's going to give up the 2 or 3 yards where a lot of other running backs would have given up, 5, 6, 7. And that's his biggest asset. And he's another guy that he's not getting as much draft hype. He's definitely in consideration to be a UDFA or maybe like a 6th, 7th round guy. But that's pretty much all of the guys on defense that are getting significant draft hype. I say significant in air quotes, but those are still 2 really solid pieces to a defense that they're sort of anchoring this defense in a way that makes the scheme slightly easier to adjust to. But there were still some hiccups, although they didn't give up any points. there were still some hiccups in the Southeast Louisiana game for the defense because, again, it's a completely different style from what they were playing last year. So, what do you think about the K-State offense against the Tulane defense?
Um, I'm really hoping that the offense can get going more quickly in this game. I mean, the offense still ended up having a pretty solid game against UT Martin. I think we've maybe lost that a little bit. Obviously, not as good as the defense, but the running game was really, really good. The offensive line in particular was really surprising, particularly a tackle. I was really happy with them. I really would like us to establish the run early. I'd like us to get like a handful, maybe 3 or 4 designed runs for Avery Johnson. I'm not asking for a full-on triple option. I just think that if we time them right and we pick our battles there, I think that we can really expose this Tulane defense. And I think having that threat of the run game is going to open things up for everybody. The quarterback run game, that is. So I'd like us to tweak our offensive plan from the first game. Although mainly it comes down to I'd like to see Avery start out a little bit more consistent in this one. I don't. I do think that we'll figure it out. I mean, Avery's talented enough that I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, and I think that sort of mirrors my thoughts as well. That they're still going to have hiccups adjusting to a new scheme, a new head coach. This is a team that I'm not going to say that there's no world where K-State should lose to them because I do think that they have the talent if K-State doesn't show up to beat them. But it's also a team that I'm very, very happy all of our non-con games are placed at the beginning of the season because this is – I don't want to say – yeah, this is probably the worst that this Tulane team is going to look because they're only going to get better as they learn and get comfortable with each other in the system. So now we can go into the sort of things to watch, which is going to be more vibes-based because someone, i.e. me, forgot to write them down in the outline. But I think I'm going to start with the thing that's on everyone's mind. And what is it that you're expecting from Avery in his second regular season start? I'm going to say this every time. TCU doesn't count. Shut up. This is not a trivia show. But what are you expecting from Avery in his second regular season start and his second overall start away from Bill Snyder Family Stadium?
I'm thinking that we're going to see a better version of Avery Johnson in this game. I think it was clear that the first half of last week really took away from what otherwise was a really good game for him. And even in that first half, he still had moments. He just wasn't consistent enough. I think if he puts together a full game that of the same quality that he had in that third quarter in the UT Martin game, I think that he'll end up with probably like 50, 60 rushing yards and low 200s for passing yards. And I'll be pretty happy with that, I think, assuming the touchdowns come with it. But I'm glad that last week I braced for an Avery pick before the game because when it happened, it didn't faze me too much because I went in mentally preparing. I was like, okay, he somehow didn't throw one last week. He's going to throw one this year. It has to happen. So I just got ready for it and it happened. Now the Band-Aid's off. He's thrown a pick. Oh no. And now
Anyway.
Yeah. Now we don't have to worry about preserving the perfect no interception record at that point. It's a burden lifted, really. So I'm expecting a more efficient passing game from him. Probably more comfortable passing day as well. And I'm hoping that we're able to get Keegan Johnson and Dante Cephas more involved on this one. Although I was really happy with Jace Brown and Trey Spivey in that first game. Particularly Keegan Johnson, I think. Probably could have gone for a couple more targets. So that's what I'm hoping for from Avery.
Yeah, what I'm hoping for and what I'm expecting are sort of two different things, and I feel like I'm not as low as some very reactionary people on Twitter, which again, you and I called that like at this point at the end of last year, we said he's going to throw one pick and people are going to start pissing on themselves.
Yep.
We called it, but what I will say is if Avery plays the way he did in the first half against UT Martin, I honestly think that he's probably going to escape without throwing any picks, weirdly enough, because this is a defense that's going to their goal is to limit explosive plays. But what I ideally want to see from Avery is if he's going to make the wrong decision, I want him to make the wrong decision confidently. I would rather have a quarterback who is confidently incorrect with a degree of consistency than I would have a quarterback who's constantly second guessing himself. So yes, I did just say that I would prefer like Jameis Winston to basically any rookie quarterback because when Jameis was on, he was confidently incorrect, and that led to at least a lot of fun, but it led to a lot of points as well. But and I'm not saying that Avery is Jameis Winston, but the way that Tulane, and it's the same thing that Will fell victim to last year in the Troy game, they're going to rotate their coverages. And if I didn't expect Will to escape that game without an interception, and Will last year is a little bit ahead mentally where Avery Johnson is now, which who would have guessed a guy with, at that point, we'll call it 3.5 years of playing experience was more mentally ready for stuff like that. I do think that the coverage rotations are going to give Avery a little bit of a hiccup. I don't expect him to have a bad game at all. In fact, I think that the number one thing for Avery is he just needs to get out of his own head and play. And that's something he did in the second half. So if he keeps that attitude, I think he'll be fine. Like I said, I'm not expecting him to be, this amazing, tier 1 Big 12 quarterback right now. I feel like that's an unfair expectation, but I am expecting him to be pretty good.
I mean, yeah, that's not an unfair expectation to want your 4-star top 100 recruit going to a second year to be pretty good. I think that's a fair expectation.
And I think the next biggest question is who wins the battle in explosive plays? The K-State offense, who has all the talent in the world, or the Tulane offense, who has a lot in the way of scheming up those big plays? And it's a unique question by virtue of it involves both sides that you have to think about.
Yeah, that's why I'm tending to lean K-State taking the victory here for explosive plays. I imagine we'll give at least one up, but I'm thinking that we'll probably get at least one long DJ Giddens run. I think Dylan Edwards is going to get an explosive play this week. We might see an explosive run from Avery Johnson as well, I think, this week. So I'm thinking K-State probably takes the cake there, just by virtue of the amount of weapons we had. And we didn't have as many explosive plays as I thought we would in week 1. I think we had 2, as I recall, 2, maybe 3. Because I know we had that long DJ Giddens run and then the Jace Brown almost touchdown. And
are the Oakley and Dylan Edwards touchdowns, do those count as explosives?
Lofton's might. It may be. I think it's 20 plus is explosive, I think.
So if it did, it would just barely qualify.
Yeah. So I think we might be looking at Dylan's catch was not 20, I don't think. But we'll say 3. So I think K-State can probably replicate that number. And Tulane, I imagine they're going to get 1, maybe 2.
Yeah, if Tulane walks away with 1 or 2 explosive plays, I will be very, very happy with the performance. I agree with you. I do think that K-State does end up getting more explosive plays, but I also think that for all their fault, I think it's more likely that Tulane gets no explosive plays or like 6 explosive plays than it is anywhere from like 1, maybe not 2, and then 3 through 5. Like they're either going to get a lot or they're not going to get nearly any. And I think it all just comes down to how prepared is K-State for the play action game. So do you have any stories that in particular you're watching for, or do you want to get into MVPs?
I think the big thing I'll be looking for is can the defensive line of K State get to Mensa early? Because we had going into week 1, I didn't really think we were going to get many sacks from the defense, and we ended up getting like 3, I think, maybe 4, and I was pretty happy with that. We had a few other near sacks. So we had like 20 pressures, just an absolute absurdity. Which, granted, a lot of it was UT Martin ran a lot more long developing pass stuff than I thought they were going to, which was kind of stupid, but they did it anyways. And so I'm wondering what Tulane's game plan is going to be regarding that. Like, are they going to go for the high risk, high reward? As if so, I think we're going to sack Mensa at least like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a game where K-State could pretty easily get pressure, which actually feeds very well into my defensive MVP pick. And I'm actually going to go with Toby. I'm going to go with Toby Osinsami for my defensive MVP pick, mostly by virtue of I think this is another example where Toby is just going to be infinitely more athletic than the poor bastard that he's lined up against. So I think that Toby, if I were to pick like one guy that may surprise people, I think Toby has a good chance of getting like another multi-sack performance and a lot of really impactful pressures this game.
Yeah, particularly if he keeps up his rate from the first game, where he had like 16 snaps and like 6, or it was like 10 pass
like 10 pressures.
And yeah, it was like 10 pass rushes and like 6 pressure, like 60% pass rush rate or pressure rate. I'm going to roll with someone on the opposite end of the defense. For this one, it's BJ Payne. I think that we could see him have a really big day in run support on the outside. Granted, at that point, you're kind of like flipping a coin between Siegel and BJ Payne, and it's just going to be what side they run to more. So I'm just going to flip a coin and say BJ Payne this time. Although Siegel is a up their pick. I was thinking maybe Mott or Osinsami, but Payne, I think. After a bit of a quiet week 1, I think he's due for a big game.
Yep. In my offensive MVP pick, it actually might come as a surprise to a lot of people, but I'm actually going to go with Keegan Johnson as my offensive MVP. And the reason for that is Keegan Johnson is the biggest rack threat on the team up to this point. He didn't get the ball in the first game, but he showed at Iowa, and when he got a lot of opportunities last year, he showed that he was a pretty effective rack threat. And whenever you're going up against a defense that's number one priority is preventing explosive plays, the rack threat is your best friend. So I think that sort of, I could see a world where it's Jace Brown, but I think that Keegan Johnson is going to be a big difference maker in this game if he's able to recapture that rack form, especially up against a really conservative defense.
I'm going to go with Dylan Edwards in this one. He had a couple of touchdowns. He had a 1-yard rushing touchdown, and then somewhere in the teens on his receiving touchdown. But he also had a couple of runs that were very close to being huge explosive plays and maybe even touchdowns. So I think that we may see one of those end up breaking for a big time play and an explosive play this week. So, building off of, if you can build off of a 2 touchdown performance as a running back, I think that Dylan Edwards could maybe see even more in the yardage department in this one, particularly if we want to unlock Avery a little bit more. I really liked our jet sweep to him, where I think we had DJ on the lead block. Now, I really liked that kind of like jet power. I don't know if that's what it is, but
Yeah,
uh,
it's yeah, close enough. It's a jet sweep with a run back lead block. So yeah, it's close enough.
okay, jet power. And
Yeah,
I think that maybe we could see Dylan Edwards make even more of those opportunities. And I think that we're going to maybe hopefully correct a little bit from not getting him as many touches I think he deserved. But we'll have to see. Like, depends on, I guess, like how many snaps are even this week, because there weren't a lot of snaps last week.
yeah. All right. So the final and most important question: what what happens if K State wins? What happens if K State lost, or what happened? I suppose. And what is your official score prediction?
K State's going to win this game if they're able to protect over the top on defense. Don't let Mensa get an explosive play to build confidence and contain their run game, which I'm not too worried about because we've been pretty effective there. And then offensively, I'm getting Avery in rhythm and get a couple of explosive plays. We're going to lose this game if we struggle on the back end to keep guys in front of us, and if Avery has another slow start. I think that those could be the two biggest contributing factors. But I do think K-State wins this game. I think K-State wins by a score of a 38-21.
K-State wins this game if they're relentless. Because if there's one thing that Joe Klanderman has done pretty well throughout his time at defensive coordinator, is he's been very, very good at making young quarterbacks uncomfortable. I mean, think back to Donovan Smith at Texas Tech in 22 or 21. In either one of those years, Joe Klanderman was very good at making Donovan Smith feel uncomfortable. Think back to the first time that Spencer Rattler played during the COVID season. He started off really well, and then Klanderman turned up the heat, and everything went a lot worse for him afterwards. So K-State wins if they're really aggressive on defense, which I know that's sort of the counterbalance to what you said of preventing explosive plays. But I think rattling the quarterback as quickly as possible will be a very, very good way to those explosive plays. And on offense, they win if Avery is just willing to be decisive with where he's going to take the ball. If he's hitching on throws, that's when he's going to get himself into trouble, because that's when he's going to project where he wants to throw the ball. If he's 1-2 throw or 1-2 go, either way, I feel like this is going to be a pretty good game for the K-State offense. K-State loses if they let Mensa and Mekhi Hughes get into a confident rhythm on offense and they start letting those little things go, even off of play action. I'm not even as concerned as much with the deep over the top stuff. I'm more concerned intermediate by getting sucked up into the play action game. And K-State loses, again, if on offense they're just not able to find that same rhythm, or people are second guessing themselves on what they're doing. I do have K-State winning this game, and I actually have them winning by a pretty good margin. I have them winning 35-10 in favor of K-State. And it's not because I think Tulane is bad. I just think that they're in an adjustment period with a young quarterback, which has notoriously not been a particularly good recipe when you're playing K-State. You could ask just about any quarterback who's below like a redshirt sophomore who's ever played K-State. I mean, look at Hoover last year. Hoover went in with a pretty good amount of hype, and then K-State destroyed him. Rocco Betts doesn't count. That entire Iowa State game doesn't count. But do you have any final thoughts before we sign off?
I guess the main thing that I want to do above all else is prevent minor injuries in this game, because we're gonna have a shorter turnaround than we're used to, because we have that Friday game coming up the following week against Arizona, and Arizona has been through one game. They've been absolutely absurd on offense. So that'll be a pretty big story to watch, not to spoil the preview for next week. But I guess that's pretty obvious, though, to anybody that watched the week 1 game.
Yeah. Ditto. But thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. And if you want to email us, we're AggievilleAlleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I'm at ACEdward00.
I am at Connor Baltazar, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out both the supporters link and our official merch link, both in our podcast and Twitter bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.